Welcome to Rhody Wellness, where we explore all things health and self-care. Whether you're seeking mental clarity, physical fitness, or insight from students like you, we've got you covered. Welcome back to the Rhody Wellness Podcast. I'm Olivia. I'm joined with Allison Hall today, and she's a clinical counselor at the University of Rhode Island here at Health Services. We are going to discuss grief. She's going to be able to answer some questions to help us better understand what grief is and break down the complexities of this emotion. Thank you, Allison, for joining us. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Well, we're excited to have you. Do you mind telling us what a clinical counselor is and what you do here at URI?
Sure. So I guess a clinical counselor might be defined differently in different areas, but at the University of Rhode Island, in general, a clinical counselor is a licensed mental health provider. And I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I work at Health Services. It's a newer role. Health Services wanted to offer access to a mental health provider right in the building. So I work in Health Services in collaboration with our entire team, and I provide therapeutic support, crisis intervention, and case management to students.
You got a lot on your plate there, it sounds like, but really important work, especially for the students here at URI. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. I really love my job.
I think when people hear the word grief, they often think about death of a loved one, of a friend. How would you define grief, and what other losses can be included in it?
Sure. So I'm glad you're asking that question from the beginning, because I do think a lot of times people forget that we grieve in a lot of different ways in a lot of different situations. So to me, the way I would think about grief is the experience of losing a person or a member of your family, maybe who's not a person, like a pet, but most of us who have pets think about our pets as people. And it also might include the loss of a lifestyle or a type of way of living that is no longer going to exist for you.
Yeah, so it sounds like a wide range of things that can be lost in grieving.
Sure.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people have heard of the stages of grief as well. Can you walk us through what the stages are, or what they're not, I should say?
Sure. So Kubler-Ross was really the person who's credited with identifying these stages of grief. And I think for most people, it was the first time we tried to really, in a wide scope, look at what are the different emotions that come up for people and how can we start making some sense out of grief, right? Initially, we thought of it as stages where you would go from one emotion and then you'd kind of like close the door on that emotion and move into the next one. What we've learned over time is that it's not as neat and tidy. There's really nothing neat and tidy about grief. And so being aware that it's generally ebbing and flowing between different stages, and you might even feel like you've kind of moved through all of them and you're on the other side of things, and then revisit them at different times of life. It's more about recognizing that the emotions that are commonly associated with a loss. And so the different emotions that we look at include denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And again, not necessarily in that order, but that's what we would anticipate. And for me, I really think it's important that we recognize that there's no quote-unquote normal way of grieving. I think the idea that there's a normal way of grieving sets people up to feel like they're not doing it right if they grieve differently. And so this is a framework. It's not a flow that you have to move through.
Thank you for clarifying that.
Sure.
And the 5 areas that you could experience, do you mind going deeper into those and just telling us like a brief definition of them, especially like bargaining, something like that? I think that might not be as straightforward.
Right, yeah. So I'll start with the denial, right? And that I think most people are familiar with the term denial, but what that might look like if we're experiencing loss, and maybe helpful if I kind of choose a loss, right? So we think about death, as I mentioned, we could also view it as a change in lifestyle. And something I see coming up really commonly in the college age population is divorce in your parents, right? So in many ways, people will view divorce as death. the death of a marriage, right? And the death of a certain way of living for a family. And so if we're grieving the loss of, let's say, finding out your parents are getting divorced, then denial might look like not accepting that that's what's going to happen, looking for evidence that it's not going to happen, looking for ways that it's not really true, or just avoiding the situation altogether. And I think that's one of the complexities that can rise up, right, in college, is that avoidance is oftentimes very tempting for understandable reasons, right? Nobody wants to feel grief, loss, anxiety, depression. So if we can avoid the emotion altogether, why wouldn't we? But the real answer is that it's always there when we come back. It's not really gone. And so denial might look like trying to find all these reasons why it's not true. Right. And I think about with denial, I think also about kind of it feeling like a shock when there's a death, especially if it's an unexpected death of like, wait, like 10 minutes ago, that person was alive and now they're not alive. Like I can't make that make sense in my head. With anger, I think anger about things, losing things, about not having things available to you or people available to you or a lifestyle available to you any longer. And that part can sometimes feel like if you lose somebody who you feel is a really good person, sometimes there can be a lot of anger, like, why did it have to happen to this person? The bargaining piece is oftentimes looked at as like, how can I make this not happen? Like, how can I rescue this? Like, how can I go back and maybe like magically change things so this is not where I landed? Which we can't do, right? But it's like this, I always think of it as like this desperation, right? To get back to what worked for you before, what felt special to you before, or to a person that you really can't imagine life without. Does that make sense, the way I just described that?
Yeah, it does.
I think that is the one that people maybe might be most confused about. Depression, I think it's so common. Depression is so common right now, but we think about it as a very low, sad mood. Sometimes it's associated with loss of ability to sleep, loss of appetite, irritability, profound sadness, feelings of hopelessness or helplessness. And I think we use the term depression so commonly, but there's a difference between feeling sad and low a little bit here and there and having more of a major depressive episode where you really can't move out of those feelings. And then acceptance is really kind of getting to a place where, okay, this is my new life, or this is my life without this person, and this is what it looks like now, and how can I start imagining my future moving forward in this new life? And since we're, sitting in a college campus, and I work in mental health on a college campus, I'll speak to another thing that I think is really common is if you've lost somebody who's really big in your life, really important in your life, even if it was years ago, even if it was decades ago, let's say you get to college and now you're in this whole new arena in this new stage of life, and maybe you lost your mom 10 years ago. But right now, you're feeling that loss so profoundly, right? Because you're in this new place and you can't share it with her. Or you get to graduation and your parent's not going to watch you walk across the stage, or a sibling's not going to watch you walk across the stage. I think it can come up for you at different stages of your life and different stages of development.
Especially with grief, I think sometimes people say, oh, it's not something you necessarily get over. And even you said it's not like a linear path where, you finish the grief program and then it's like, oh, I'm not dealing with grief anymore.
Right, yeah.
It's something that you may have to live with your entire life at different intensities.
Right.
And especially because you work with college students, and this is a podcast kind of marketed towards college students, how does grief commonly show up in college students? Looking at these, different areas, what are some common examples that you see?
Yeah, so, I think about the lifestyle in college. You're removed from your family unless you're a commuter and you're living at home. But even with that, a lot of your time is spent away from home, around people that are not your family. And so if there is a loss that occurs while you're at school, how that might show up is a little bit maybe delayed. Maybe that avoidance naturally happens because you're not around the people who are also grieving. It might be hard for you to focus on your academic work. You might experience a hard time being able to complete projects and have increased stress because of that. It might be hard to motivate to go to class. I also think for a lot of people, there's a lot of uncertainty around like, do I still go to my club meetings? Am I supposed to be home in my dorm grieving? Do I move on? Is there something wrong with me doing things when I'm enjoying them? So, I think it can show up in maybe not wanting to go to a party, or maybe going and then feeling like maybe you shouldn't be there, or not knowing how to share with your friends, what's happened. So I think it can impact your social life and your academic life and your work life, especially when we think about the layers of all of the feelings in the different stages of grief that we just talked about.
Obviously, grief, I think, affects people differently, but I was just wondering if you see any trends specifically to validate, I think, people's experiences, if they're like, oh, is this normal that, I'm experiencing this when this is usually not how I approach things.
Looking for more specifics around what it might feel like or look like for someone?
Yeah, just like, not having motivation to do schoolwork or something like that. And usually it's someone who's like an A+ student, but now they're experiencing grief. And so, this is happening. Yeah. But like, is that like a normal thing that happens to most people, that type of thing?
Yeah, so I'm so glad that we paused and you asked that question. So I think the thing I want to say probably repetitively is that a lot of people that I work with who are going through the grief process ask, is this normal? Is this okay? And that's why we really want to move away from the idea that there's a normal way to grieve, because I think it makes a hard process even harder when you feel like you have to do it right. There's no really right way to do it. We do, from a clinical standpoint, look at if the grief gets so complicated that it's really impacting your ability to function for a longer period of time, and then we might look at more intensive support. But in general, we want to really move away from the idea of judging ourselves. So if I happen to feel happy one afternoon and my grandfather passed away 2 weeks ago, that I let myself be happy. That I don't say, what's wrong with you? Why are you feeling happy? Your grandfather just died. It doesn't make any sense for you to be happy right now. Versus, gosh, I notice I'm feeling happy. I haven't felt like this in a few weeks. I'm feeling a little conflicted around it, but, grief just happens in different ways, and maybe I'll just let myself feel happy right now, and that's okay. We as a society are not super comfortable seeing people feel sad. And it's okay to feel sad, and it's okay to feel angry, and it's okay to feel like your person didn't deserve to die, or it's not fair that happened at this stage of life, or, just really allowing the feelings to happen. I think that's how we tend to move through our experiences in the healthiest way, is without judging ourselves. There's one other thing I wanted to mention, because when you said that piece about I'm used to being an A+ student and now I'm not.
Yeah.
I think for a lot of people, when things are out of their control, it leads to, but wait, I'm an A+ student. Now I have to live with this loss, and simultaneously I'm not getting A's anymore, and what does that mean? And this is not the way I'm used to living. And that's demonstrative of life, right? We can do everything perfectly, and these outside forces can come in and throw us through a tumble. And that's really, that's part of how we live as human beings. And so, again, that acceptance piece of yes, I did all of these things to set myself up, and this really hard thing is happening for me, and I really can't move through life the same way I did before. So really kind of accepting that piece. It's not easy, but I think that, again, is allows us to be forgiving and kind to ourselves.
And then we talked about this in the first question a little bit, but just to encourage people going through different types of losses, I just wanted to talk a little bit more about the possible differences or similarities between these and how they might present differently in the grief process, like death versus maybe a loss of a friendship, a divorce, a breakup, injuries, especially sports injuries, and how, your lifestyle changes very drastically coming to college, even if it's not with an injury, but just maybe not playing the sport that you used to play anymore. Yeah. I think that's very prevalent in something that a lot of people go through. Yep. And don't acknowledge that is something that you can grieve as well, and is a completely valid reason to be grieving because you have experienced a loss.
Yeah. I always think of college as one of the biggest transitions many people go through in their life, right? You're living away from your family, or if you're commuting, you're not living away from them, but you're kind of outside of your town and your home area. And for folks who live here, you are oftentimes making a whole new group of friends and learning a new culture, environment, thinking about who you're going to eat your meals with, which maybe you didn't have to think about that, growing up. So there's a lot of change that comes into play, a lot of change, a lot of transition. And I'm so glad you brought the piece about athletes up, because a lot of people play sports their whole life growing up, and maybe they're even a 3-season athlete, and they're not going to play for URI, but now they've gone from, having a team every season to not having a team and not having the activity that they're so used to being part of their life. So there is a lot of change when you come here, and change can feel hard even when it's great, exciting change. The other one you mentioned that we hadn't talked about yet, and I'm glad you brought up, is breakups. That is the one that I get the most commonly around, why am I still sad? My friends are telling me I should be moving on, and I'm not ready to move on yet. And that goes back to what I said earlier about really trusting your own feelings and really knowing that it's going to take as long as it takes, and you mentioned earlier, everyone's a little bit different. And so maybe your friend broke up with their boyfriend and they're dating someone new within a week and it's working well for them. That's great. But maybe that's not what's going to work well for you. Some people might say, well, why am I sad if I know it was the right thing to do? I think that really speaks to the idea that 2 different emotions, 3 different emotions, 5 different emotions can all happen at the same time. Human beings are not meant to only feel one feeling at a time. And so maybe part of me is relieved and part of me is sad and part of me is excited about what comes next and part of me is angry that I, maybe lost time in a relationship. Like, all of these things can happen at once.
Would you say that grieving helps someone move on into the next chapter, especially when it comes to like lifestyle changes?
Yeah. I mean, my personal feeling is that if we avoid our losses and pretend we don't have the feelings, I always kind of think of it as having a backpack, where if your feelings were rocks and you didn't want to deal with them and you just threw them in your backpack and you're like walking along thinking, I feel I can't see them. I'm fine, until eventually you can't move anymore. So if I have a serious breakup because there was something really unhealthy happening in my relationship and I decided to end the relationship, but I don't take the time to think about how did I end up in the relationship, what promoted those behaviors, how did those patterns continue, I'm not really giving myself a chance to learn and think about how maybe I want to move into my next relationship differently. And so, as I said before, I think it can be really tempting to avoid the hard feelings because it's a nicer way, initially, but we're still carrying that backpack full of rocks around with us. With grief, one of the hardest things is knowing that you can't predict the outcome. And if someone said to you, well, as long as you can make it through 2 more months of feeling like this, you're going to be fine, then most people would be great. But there's a lot of uncertainty. How long is this going to be my way of life? And I don't like feeling like this. And when am I going to be done? So,
yes. A lot of complexities.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then just to wrap up this episode, I just wanted to talk about a slightly different type of grief, anticipatory grief.
Yeah.
Can you just tell us what that is and how people might experience that?
Yeah, absolutely. So anticipatory grief is generally grief that you are experiencing when you find out something, you're going to have a loss. So if somebody were to call me and say, Grandma just got diagnosed with cancer and it sounds like it's terminal. And so we're going to have about 6 months left with her. Now I know my grandma's going to die and I don't know how that is going to look, but I'm now preparing myself to grieve. And so when we look at anticipatory grief, we might look at a terminal diagnosis, a family member. We might look at maybe our parents calling and saying, we're going to sell the family home now that you're off and to college, and we're going to downsize. And maybe that is your your safe place, your happy place where all your memories are. So anticipating, like, where are we going to live and what's it going to be like? Am I going to have a room? And all of those pieces, or maybe they're going to relocate.
Sounds like there's a lot of things that with life changes you can anticipate losses or changes and have a lot of mixed emotions about that.
Sure, yeah.
Thank you for joining us for this episode, and we'll see you in the next one.
Sounds great.
Before we wrap up, a quick reminder that all information shared in today's podcast is for informational and educational purposes only. Thank you for listening to another episode of Roadie Wellness. If you like what you heard today, tune in every Tuesday on all podcast platforms for more. If you want to stay up to date on events and healthcare tips, please follow us at URI Health Promotions on Instagram. And if you have any ideas for future podcast episodes or more social media content that you'd like to see, please feel free to DM us or email us. Until next time, take care and stay healthy.